everybody, welcome back to Eggs the Podcast. But before we get started, I want to talk to you about our new sponsor, Taylor Style. If you've listened to this show for a while, you probably know I'm pretty intentional about where I put my attention. I like to keep certain parts of life simple so that I can focus on the work, the conversations, and the things that actually matter to me. Clothing was always one of those areas where I didn't want it taking up a lot of headspace, but I still need to show up every now and then looking put together when it matters. And that's where Taylor Style has genuinely been a game changer for me. I'm a subscriber right now, and every few weeks I get a box with hand-picked outfits chosen by a real stylist, refined by their AI, and the crazy part is they actually nail it most of the time. Stuff I would never go buy, but I end up wearing nonstop just because it works. What I've liked most is how little effort it requires on my end. I don't have to shop, I don't have to guess what goes together, and I don't have to deal with laundry when I'm done. I just wear the clothes, send them back, and the next box shows up when it's time. Simple. So whether you're heading into a new year wanting to feel a little more dialed in, or you just want an easier way to look sharp without changing who you are, Taylor makes that upgrade pretty effortless. If you want to try it, you can get 25% off your first month with code EGGS at taylor.style/membership. That's TAELOR.style/membership. Use code EGGS to take 25% off your first month. I use it. It works for me. It's been a great addition to my routine. I think you'll love it. Now, back to the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Eggs the Podcast. Today's special guest is Jonathan Rosenfeld. How are you, man?
I am great. Thank you for having me. Happy New Year almost.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks so much for making time to talk to us today.
Really appreciate it. Why don't you give us a quick overview of who you are? I know you're an attorney and you focus a lot in AI, but how did you get to where you are right now?
Well, yes, I am an attorney, although I sort of consider myself more of a business person / entrepreneur. And really that's probably, that's probably the majority of the time that I spend. And in terms of, interest to me, yes, the law can be fascinating, but really what I'm interested in is growing and expanding my business. I am the owner, managing attorney, and business development person at Rosenfeld Injury Lawyers in Chicago. We do all different types of personal injury cases, and that's sort of my area in general. And then what specifically we've really niched down over the past year or so in terms of really developing certain very specific areas of the law, which resonate both with our clients as well as with, search engines and the evolution of AI. So that's really what I do. Other than that, I've got, business aside, I'm married, I've got 2 wonderful kids, and, that keeps me pretty busy.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I love it. Well, and I think it's an interesting topic too, especially given your focus on AI and sort of future tech and marketing and things like that. I think it'll be really fun to get into this with you. But I feel like your industry, in particular, law firms, I think are kind of like my industry and maybe Mike's to some extent, which are, industries that are ripe for AI to kind of either destroy you or help you grow. Like it's going to be one or the other, but you're probably not going to be able to just keep doing what you've been doing. And so I think it's pretty cool that you've been taking some big steps in that way. So I wonder if you talk a little bit about just sort of your perspective on sort of the future of your business and the way it's working and how you're seeing AI play a role.
Yeah, I guess there's 2 different aspects of it. From internal workings, we're starting to use and adapt, a lot of the AI features on Gemini and email and things like that. But really externally from a marketing perspective, what I'm really working on and really tinkering with, and some of it's working, and frankly, some of it's, I wish it was working a little bit better, but is really focusing on demonstrating your expertise in a particular area. Because I think AI has the power to generate vast amounts of content that you can just, essentially, punch it into a computer, whatever you want, and it'll just throw out a mess of content. What I'm really trying to do now is not only generate content, but generate content that that has more of a human side to it. So in other words, if I'm doing, like we finished doing a website on bicycle accidents, and we have got a lot of content on bicycle accidents. There's a lot, I know if you're not in the area, you may not know, but there's a lot of attorneys who have specific websites designated to bicycle accidents. I see Mike with the bike in back, and I'm sort of smirking about that. But essentially, a lot of these websites, they just become very generic. And what we're trying to do is really take the legal side of things and apply it to maybe a specific case that we handled. So for example, if we have a page about a Doring bicycle accident, we're going to talk about the laws that are applicable to prevent Doring accidents. But then we're also going to talk about a specific case that we handled involving a cyclist who was injured in a Doring accident. We can talk about, the financial recovery that we have obtained for him. So what we're trying to do is really use the tools available to everyone, and then layer it up with an extra, humanizing layer to really show that not only we know the law, but we're really the experts in this particular area. And I think what I've seen is that a lot of times when people are using AI tools to generate content, they're missing that sort of unique element of their expertise or whatever their voice, which really leaves a void, I think, in a lot of situations. And inevitably, there's just a lot of mess out there. And I think when you're showing your expertise, and you're really just, maybe not even expertise, but you're really putting that extra layer of effort into it, you are able to differentiate yourself from competitors down the street.
So AI and law and legal stuff seems like it should go hand in hand, because really AI is crawling a bunch of data, legal briefs. It seems like it would be real easy to hey, gather all the information on bicycle accidents that happened in this market at this time, all the legal cases and so on and so forth. And it should be able to just crawl it and pull it exactly for what you need. Is that kind of the case in law these days? It's more of a helping hand. I've seen some videos of people taking it a little too far in court and going nuts with it. But as far as replacing 4 or 5 different assistants, you could probably just crawl it real quick, get what you need, get the info, and be ready for court the next day pretty quick. Is that pretty much what you're finding out?
You can, but what we're really conscious about, and I think some of the newsworthy episodes you've mentioned are really a good reminder for everyone that you really have to verify everything.
Yeah.
If you just let these tools just run wild, you will get vastly accurate information. But what happens is that when you get that, one statistic that's wrong, or that case law that may have been overturned, and you don't check it, that's really when you run into problems, both professionally, and ethically, frankly, with the court and with your clients and everything else. But certainly from a standpoint of beginning, absolutely. I mean, it's a tremendous time saver. I mean, right now we're using different tools to generate, for example, we're doing a lot of content on, I'm jumping around a little bit, but on trucking companies, and in terms of trucking company safety records. And it's really, really useful to use some of these AI tools to extract that information that may have taken, 2 or 3 people, I don't know, hours, frankly, to gather that information, look at the accident rate maybe per mile, or break down into a really tangible statistic that now you can really get very, very quickly and very accurately. So for data, I really find that AI is really helpful. For more of an analytical perspective, I still think that it's a little bit lacking, and that's really also where you can differentiate yourself.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that, standing out in a competitive market. I mean, obviously, your realm of expertise in personal injury law is, crowded marketplace, and there's certain connotations that come with those types of things. I mean, akin to the way people think about used car salesmen and things like that. There's like reputable companies, but you've also got your share of shady guys on the other side that are kind of messing with the reputation of the reputable firms. And so I think, maybe even more so, or more importantly now with AI and things like that, it's important to stand out in those fields, because it'd be easier for the bad guys to make a bigger message or make more noise than it ever was in the past. But it also, for the firms that are reputable and the firms that are actually trying to help and they're not just being predatory, those guys need to have the opportunity to raise their voice too and raise their profile and create more good messaging in their world. So I wonder if you talk a little bit about just, as a competitive landscape and in maybe one of the more competitive realms of law, how do you find your position and how do you stand out now? I mean, you mentioned, content strategy, which I think is really bright. And I think riding the AI wave is obviously a very important part of this. But, maybe today, what are the sort of universal truths or the things that you've been working on over the years that you're going to continue doing in 26?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've sort of, I don't know, feel a little bit more comfortable about now than I may have felt, 6 months ago, is that really the same things that, differentiated you, in the past are really going to differentiate you in the future. Showing, frankly, just people want to see someone that they can relate to, regardless of your circumstance. If you're injured in an accident, you don't care, how, frankly, how polished your lawyer's shoes are. You don't care, necessarily about the fantastic brief they may have written a year ago. What you care about is you care about someone who's responsive and attentive to your needs and has, experience with your particular situation. And I think a lot of times, myself included, you sort of get overwhelmed by some of these tools and you see maybe a competitor who's got a flashy, ad either on TV or on a website or something.
It's all about the
but
billboards.
But ultimately, I think regardless of your circumstance and regardless of your, where you come from, these are things that, people want. They want it. They want someone who's responsive. So, what? We have people who, answer calls 24 hours a day. We return calls, lawyers in my office return calls every single day, Christmas, New Year's included. It doesn't matter. These are little things that we do from a service standpoint, because not, obviously, we can talk with, I'm jumping around. We can talk about the marketing component, but ultimately you have to realize that when they're calling you, they're not calling just you. They're calling, the 5 or 10 other people who, maybe down the street from you who are competitors. And ultimately, you have to be servicing these people very quickly, and you have to be addressing their needs and their concerns and answering their questions, because if you're not, someone else will. And so that's something that, that this is something that I've really held near and dear to my heart for a long, long time. And I think it's really served me well, frankly, because, I just am of the belief that, when you're resting, someone else is working and they're getting that business. And so you just got to be super responsive, and that's just something that we've done. And that's part of our culture.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that, one of the things that really stands out in what you said is this notion that basically it's still the interpersonal relationship that's the most important thing. It's the, the trust that you establish by being available to, any time of the day. It's the, relationship that you start to develop by responding quickly and all those kinds of things. Like, I mean, all that stuff. So it's funny, we sit and talk, we spend a lot of time talking about AI and the future of marketing and all this kinds of stuff. But it's like, at the same time, all the stuff that always worked still works. And so, and building relationships, I think, is one of the big things. I wonder, though, what do you think about the opposite? Like, is there something that you used to do in the past that you just don't think will work going forward? So, I mean, if relationships is a relic of the past that's going to continue thriving in the future, what's the opposite of that?
Well, I think, I think from a marketing perspective, some of the techniques that were very pervasive a couple years ago, in terms of, first, keyword stuffing content, that's done. A lot of the generic, images that people were using on websites, that's over. You have to, again, it's not, I think what a lot of times people get very concerned about is they get very caught up with new technology, and they really, almost become crippled by not taking any action. And they get very intimidated by a lot of these new technologies that may, spit out a fantastic, filtered photo of them, or someone in their office. But I think at the end of the day, what you have to do is you really have to use those tools. And again, I've sort of hit on it before, but layer on your personal take on all these things. So, whatever's working today in terms of marketing, it may not work 6 months or a year from now. And I think you just have to recognize that and adapt to it. But a lot of times from a marketing perspective, a lot of the, what we were doing in terms of, maybe having a lot of different location pages, that's not really working as well as it may have in the past. Sometimes in the past, what we had done is instead of having one longer page on a specific topic, we were having 5 or 6 different pages on it. And that was, leading to issues with content cannibalization on it. So, I mean, there's subtle things, but again, I think you really have to stick to the basics in a lot of these things, and really, I think you'll be okay. But yeah, I mean, everything evolves over time, and I think you just have to realize that you either adapt or you die.
So you've mentioned a few different websites, almost like you're designing a website around a specific topic. You mentioned the bicycles, you mentioned the semi trucks, you mentioned it almost is like you're niching down to the type of accident or the type of injury or a client that you focus on or represent. How do you A/B test that? And is there a reason you're going with multiple websites instead of one website that contains multiple, like you could have a blog in a single website that covers all those topics? Is there a reason you're going with different domains for different specific items?
Great. Yeah, great question. First off, we do have, a sort of the mothership of main websites, but then we also have very specific websites designated to specific injuries. And the reason for that is if you start, and this is just pretty much through trial and error. And, there's been some case studies on this in different search engine publications. But if you start going to like the AI overview and you click on that, and then you click on the next overview and you keep clicking through it, it's like a onion, and it keeps peeling deeper and deeper the layers of the onion. And what we want to do is we want to be able to, get into that deep layer where if someone's really, looking at a specific topic, and they're looking at, if they're in a whatever, let's say that we have another website. I know it's going to shock you, but on nursing home cases, and if someone's researching these topics, frankly, what we want is we want people who are an educated, client. We want someone who's done the research, who's looking, really diving deep into this, as opposed to someone from maybe 10 or 20 years ago who's just, flipping through the yellow pages, and whoever had the brightest tie, they would just call them. We want people who are actually learning about the topic for themselves, their family member, whoever, And by the time they contact us, they've done the research. But in order to get to that point, we have to really put together a very, very comprehensive, website, or I call it piece of work, demonstrating our expertise. And that, and again, at the end of the day, we're writing this really both for two things. We're writing it for our client, or prospective client, and we're doing this for the search engines. When you start doing the AI overview and you click on that, you'll see people all, I think sometimes in the past it was called people also ask. And if you click on those, there's a whole nother layer of that. And I think what a lot of these search engines are doing, it's pretty obvious what they're doing, is they're associating a brand with a particular topic. So you want to have your brand associated with whatever topic you want to have expertise in. And you can still have a main website, but what happens is that if you are covering, let's say you're covering 10 or 12 or 20 different topics, it's difficult for some of these search engines, depending on how your content is structured, to draw the connection between these different topics. And in my world, I think they're all somewhat related, bicycle accident, truck accident, nursing home abuse. But in the eyes of a search engine, they don't necessarily draw that connection. In the eyes of go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that actually makes a lot of sense. Because not only does the Google or whatever entity out there crawl your site, they're going to say, hey, this one is an expert on bicycle accidents, whatever. But you have the overhead company website that I'm assuming you're linking back from the external site to your company site. Every single link back actually helps your SEO grow. So that's part of an SEO search, is the link backs and the credible links that are going from one site to another. So by doing that and having multiple domains, that probably helps your overall SEO as well. From what I understand, I could be wrong.
No, you're 100% correct. We're not doing any, we're not creating a lot of times there was this talk about private blog networks from the past, where people would have, it was somewhat of a black hat, SEO technique, where people would essentially, have a stable of maybe, 50, 100 websites. A lot of them were really unrelated to one another, and they would just sort of link back and forth. And what, Google's, there's no hiding from Google or any of these other search engines anymore, but they would see that, hey, like, why is a Chinese food, restaurant, linking to Jonathan's website about law that's just not related? And why is it also related, linking to a baseball card website? So, but when you do have, things that are really related and genuine, I do think, yes, you do get credit for that. If you look at, how Amazon is set up with, the links, Zappos and everything else on their footer, they're basically just essentially reinforcing their brand to a certain degree. Maybe it's obviously, I'm not going to compare myself at all to Amazon, but it's a similar theory there.
Yeah. Well, what I love about it is I think it's a real bit of practical advice for a lot of small business owners, because I think a lot of people have fear to niche into a specific area. I think a lot of business owners, especially young ones, will try to be all things to all people, or, they'll have kind of a very generalist approach as to what they do for work. And, even though personal injury is a niche of law, let's say, it's still a really broad area. Just the three examples you've given, from bikes to trucks to nursing homes. Even that's quite the spectrum, So if you're really trying to niche, you could probably build a practice around any one of those things. You're the bicycle guy, or you're the trucking guy. But what I love about this, and it's kind of like what I call pseudo niching, which is this notion of, building a niche, but like you're not actually precluding any of the other things that your business does, but you're developing or showing expertise in a given way, which is, in this case, through landing page strategy. And so I really like that, because it doesn't I guess it doesn't shorten or minimize what it is that your company can do at large, in terms of the types of customers you can serve. But each of those things, and you mentioned how like the web browsers and stuff will see these, or how Google will crawl them. But also on the other end of that, the person who's viewing it, or the person who's Googling it, the person who has had the nursing home accident, or the person who has had the bicycling accident, the person who's riding the bike isn't looking for somebody who's great with trucking companies. They're looking for somebody that knows something about bikes.
That's a really, really good point. I think a lot of times, people are almost turned off when they're like, this guy, I was in a car accident, what, I don't give a crap about someone's, if the guy handles divorce cases and business stuff. I want the best lawyer for my particular situation. And I think that's a really, really good point where, if you do have some of these areas, which, again, under the big umbrella of law, or whether if you're in real estate or whatever, it doesn't make any difference. People want someone who has experience with their particular situation. And I think sometimes when, people, maybe it's out of ego. I don't know exactly what it is, or just trying to throw darts at the wall and hope one of them sticks. But they just go overboard in terms of the breadth of their, content on a website. And I think sometimes while you may think it's awesome to have all of this content out there and show how fantastic you are in every single area, the person who's picking up the phone and paying your bills ultimately really doesn't care at all about these other areas of expertise or really interest that you may have. So I think it's a really, really good point. We've done a little bit of A/B testing with that, and we've actually tried to segment out certain areas to avoid that, so people don't see, if for example, if they have a drug recall case or something, they don't, they may be calling from out of state. They don't care about Chicago car accidents. And I think that's something that you have to recognize as a business owner, that really sometimes you want to maybe take a step back and niche down a little bit and really maybe go deeper as opposed to spreading out. So that's something that we've really tried to do.
Yeah. And one of the other things I like about it too is that, especially for small businesses and maybe even, all the way into mid and large size companies, it's hard to market to everyone. So if everyone is your audience, it's really hard to spend all your marketing dollars trying to reach everyone. Really what you do need are some of these sort of niched categories, where, okay, we're going to put a little extra money into this or that, vertical. And that will help our marketing dollars go further, right? I don't know. I don't know how much of this is seasonal, but I have to imagine car accidents pick up in the winter, let's say. So if we're going to have more car accidents in the winter, well, let's adjust our marketing spend so that our, car accident website is getting a little bit more traffic and a little more exposure. And we'll back off of bicycle accidents because, nobody's riding their bike in a Chicago winter. And so I think, it gives you the opportunity to have a strategy like that versus if you have just like a website that's kind of a catch-all. It's like, okay, well, I can drive people to this catch-all website of ours, but, we're spending the same amount of money on bikes as we are on cars, even though we know there's no bike traffic coming this time of year, So I think it's kind of it gives people.
That's a great point. And again, to what we were talking about earlier, again, if someone's looking at if you're driving traffic and someone's looking at it and be like, this is sort of random or whatever, it just dilutes your brand. You're wasting money if you're doing paid search. It goes on and on and on. But at the end of the day, I just think that a lot of these techniques, marketing techniques, SEO techniques that may have, you may have worked 2 or 3 years ago. And people, read about and they see all the, development with AI and content and stuff like that. And they get very frankly scared. You have to just take a step back and just sort of really think about things from a consumer's point of view, as opposed to maybe what you want to do, which can be disheartening sometimes.
So I recently drove through Vegas, and I don't know, have you driven through Vegas recently?
I Have driven through? Not really. I've been to Vegas. I was there last year, but yeah, it's not my favorite
So,
place. But
so with that said, going through Vegas, there's a section where there's 4 or 5 accidents every time I drive through there. And just so happens in that section, there's about 8 different billboards for personal injury attorneys in that 10-mile section. And I honestly wonder, this was my thought process as I drove through there and saw 4 accidents and all the billboards. I'm like, do they statistically figure out where the most accidents happen and place their billboards accordingly? Because that to me would make sense, and the thought, like, the lead up to my question is, you do a lot of stuff online, but you do other marketing offline. Is that something that you do? Is that something an avenue you go down? Is the billboard placement?
I don't do billboards. I've tried everything. Frankly, I've tried. I've done TV. I've done radio. I've done. Actually, I take it back. I have done some billboards in the past. I've done some. I don't know, the seats for the bus and stuff like that. I've actually done some. So yeah, I was pre-Saul though. I've done everything. And at the end of the day, everything does work. It's just a matter of how well it works. And it's like, we were talking about with content, you can scattershot all these different marketing dollars everywhere. And it just becomes like, I think what you really need to do is, whether you're doing something online or you're doing billboards or you're doing TV, you have to focus on one or maybe 2 areas and ratchet down on that, as opposed to doing everything. Because I mean, everything's the cost associated with all this stuff, it gets out of hand very, very quickly. And I think you're better off saturating one area, or what, maybe saturation is not the correct term, but diving in a little bit deeper with some of these areas, as opposed to just going crazy on everything. Because to have one billboard, you may get one, few cases, but really to have an effective billboard campaign, you have to have, I don't know what the numbers are, but I'm guessing it's probably 10, 15 at least in a fairly concentrated area. Same with the television spot. First time someone sees it, they're going to be like, whatever. The 20th time they see it, it may be different. So I think it's really important that you just pick your poison and go with that
and stick with it. Do you have a sales funnel process that you track where your leads generations come from?
We do. We've got we use CallRail with different designated numbers for every single case type, every website. When we do a paid search, we have a separate number. We try to track as much as possible. It's increasingly, despite all these new tools, it's really actually more difficult, I find, to track today than it was maybe in the past, just because if you are doing different campaigns, and you are doing paid search, and you're doing a Facebook campaign, and you're doing a YouTube campaign, a lot of times people jump back and forth, and people may not even recognize where they're clicking, and what site they're on and things like that. So we do try to do that, but at the end of the day, it becomes very, very gray in terms of how you get that client. So to answer your question, we do, but I don't know how effective it is all the time.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about, I mean, we've obviously talked about some of the things you're doing, but I mean, your company, at least according to the information we saw, is still showing 10 to 20% growth in an industry where a lot of companies are going out if they're not growing at all. And so I wonder if you just talk about, like, in your experience, you say obviously you've been tracking what you can track and things like that, but is there one particular channel or multiple channels that make up the most of that new growth that you're seeing versus just, whatever you would have considered being sort of traditional growth, just this pretty significant growth?
Yeah. I mean, I think what we what we always have really done a pretty good job with is we're always looking at, I think in every business, you need multiple streams of income. Um, if it, and you can apply it actually to whatever you want to do, whether it's an investment or whatever. You got to have your S&P, you got to have your bonds, you got to have your real estate, and I look at that almost the same way as I do with the business. So you have your sort of your core group, which may be auto accidents or slip and fall or something like that. But then we're always looking at different, if there's a mass tort out there, if there's a medication recall, we're going after that. If there's a few years ago, there was a law which enabled military veterans to get compensation for their injuries if they were at a Marine base in North Carolina known as Camp Lejeune. And if you unfortunately, the government really covered up a lot of the safety issues related to the drinking water there, and people got really sick. We got into Camp Lejeune. That window of opportunity is now closed. We have those cases, and we're moving on to other areas. So I think as a business owner, whether you're in law or whatever you're in, you always have to be looking around the corner and seeing what is out there, and that really enables you to grow and adapt as new areas emerge and as new opportunities develop.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, and I think it's, that ability to be agile, it's one of the things that technology has really enabled for, I think, a lot of, small to mid-sized businesses. It used to be much harder to move around and to chase the new shiny thing. But in industries like yours specifically, where there are new cases that pop up all the time, or there's a new thing that's uncovered, the ability to jump onto those things is great. And back to our conversation before about sort of, this niching or pseudo niching down into different things. When the Camp Lejeune story breaks, well, now you've got another landing page you can throw up, and you've got another vertical where your agency can offer expertise in, cases of that type. And, and for people who are victim of Camp Lejeune or have questions about it or whatever, they can do a Google search and they can locate you, even if they don't find the grand, mothership, as you referred to it as the website. They can find you for this specific thing that they're looking for in that moment. And, it doesn't matter to them that you can help them with their bike wreck too. And so, so I think that, that the technology has really enabled us to make those kind of jumps really quickly, which I think is very cool. But to that end, how are you choosing the platforms and the tech that you decide to try? So, I mean, I'm sure just like all of us, you're experiencing like this overload of new things that are coming out, and there's all this new stuff and everything's AI enabled. How are you, or like what process are you using to make decisions about what to try, where to spend resources, and that kind of thing?
Trial and error. School of Hard Knocks is my best school, but no. I think you just have to really keep. It's really sounds really boring and really really cliche, but you just got to keep grinding along. I think one of the things that we're doing now is we're really doubling down on YouTube content. If you look at the statistics in terms of search volume and content viewed online, YouTube is the second biggest search engine out there. And I think that, whether it works for your particular industry today or not, you have to realize that that's a big area, big pool that ultimately, I would guess that will be an opportunity in the future. So, I think that that's a tremendous area, and we're doing a lot of we're using AI to do videos on YouTube. We're really trying, and I think this is really, I'm not saying this in a grandiose way by any means, but you always have to just be willing to try these different things, because it's very cost effective. Frankly, it's cheap. It's relatively cheap compared to other things. And I think, if you just sort of stand idle on the sidelines and that sort of expands in the future, you're going to really, kick yourself for not getting in. If you see, you're getting some traction there, by all means, double down on it. But I think the key is just to remain nimble and try these different things and really, put enough. When I say try things, I don't mean just, throw up one video and just call it a day. I mean, do a series of videos on whatever your particular business is, and maybe try 5 or 6 different topics, see which ones start getting a couple likes, and do another video or 3 videos on that topic. But I think that's really the way that you have to do it. And, no one knows what's going to be coming down the pipe in the future. But I think that if you have at least your foot in the door, you're going to have an advantage over your competitors.
Yeah, the YouTube as a search engine, people don't really think of it that way. But if you step back and think of, oh, I'm working on my truck today and I need to figure out how to change the oil or whatever, I can't tell you how many times I've just jumped in there, change oil on 2002 Ford Avalanche, whatever. YouTube is the go-to for like self-training for me or for other things. So if someone's trying to learn a specific topic and you have content on that topic on YouTube, it's a great way to A, let them know you're there as an expert, and B, you can link from your YouTube channel or your page back to your website or to whatever you're using, Linktree, whatever, to try and generate leads. So yeah, that's a great observation. Are you doing anything specific with your YouTube channel that is helping other than the AI content? Are you titling your titles in a certain way? Are you adding SEO features to the overview? What are you doing specifically with that?
A lot of it, I think still people you got to sort of look at what people are searching for. Mm-hmm. And I'm just a big believer in, looking at FAQ content as part of that. I think it sort of gets really, redundant and really boring if you're just like, hey, if you're in a car accident, call me. People don't want that. I think people they want more specific information. They want to know, about, particular topic. And if you look at frankly, if you look at a lot of search queries for whether it's, how to change the oil on your truck, or who makes, whatever, the best pan, or whatever you're looking for. I think a lot of times people, not only are they typing it in, but they're speaking into their phone as a question. And I think you really want to take advantage of that from a content marketing perspective, both on YouTube as well as your website, in terms of really answering very specific questions, and gearing it towards, not necessarily an aggressive sales technique. You want to be, just give out that information. And, I'm just a believer that if you give that information, freely, it'll ultimately come back to you in spades.
Well, I think it's one of those things, YouTube and podcasts and all these kinds of platforms where you're actually out there sharing your voice or your opinions, I think is kind of an extension of what we talked about earlier in terms of relationship development, right? People have relationships with content online, even though it sounds a little funny. But if you listen to a podcast long enough, you actually might start to believe that somebody, or that you have some kind of relationship with them, right? You've heard about their kids and you know what they do for work. And, you kind of start to understand a person, right? And it's a little bit of a one-sided relationship, but nonetheless, that affinity can help generate that trust and things that turn into business down the road. So, we believe, and we've talked to a lot of people who espouse this idea that, sort of the notion should be that you give more than you take in, right? Like by giving freely, to your point, you're creating value for a person. And if they use you, awesome. If they don't, at least they left better because they got some good content or good information. And that ultimately is just one more layer on that onion of trust that you're trying to develop, where eventually you've got a full bulb there and people are ready to go to pull the trigger with you. So I think that the content like that is really key. You also mentioned coming up in search engines and things like that. I think AI is another big search engine that we need to be thinking about, which is, like when you ask ChatGPT a question, how do you get your company in there? And I think a big part of that is exactly the things we've been talking about, putting yourself out there as the expert in subject matter A, B, or C, will allow those GPT tools or whatever to make recommendations based on their web searches. And if you're coming up in their web searches, then that'll be the type of thing that a person is asking their phone for, and then it's then delivered to them. So I think it makes a lot of sense to, use those two different pieces of, your overarching marketing strategy, one, to try and develop relationships in person, but then two, to extend that through content like on YouTube or wherever.
Yeah. I mean, I think it builds trust, and really that's really the key for all of this, is to really develop trust with prospective clients, develop trust with search engines. They're using a lot of, from what I've seen, a lot of these search engines are actually looking at YouTube as sort of a third party authority when it comes to some of this stuff. And if they see, you just have to you can't really look at things compartmentalized today. You have to look at everything very holistically. And I think that's just part of the game, part of the piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, the last question I wanted to ask you, just as we're starting to get to the end here, I wanted to talk to you just like about starting over. So obviously we've talked about a lot of the things that you've learned, trial and error, school of hard knocks, and all that stuff. But if you were young attorney, young entrepreneur, young, person going into business today, or maybe an established person who's trying to start something new, where would you begin in terms of whether it's content, whether it's, building websites, whatever sort of strategies you might approach, if you had to tell the younger you how to get started, where would you begin?
Oh man, I don't know. No, I would honestly, I would try to do a combination of, old fashioned networking, and in terms of really, developing, that network of people who, you could go out for lunch with, go out for coffee with, who, you may have gone to school with, sending them an email, writing them a note. I think people have sort of lost awareness of the impact of direct networking and face-to-face contact. And I think that's sort of a shame. And I think, especially for a young person, who may have, recently graduated school or relatively recently graduated school, I mean, in my mind's eye, the real value of school is not necessarily what they're teaching you, but it's really the network that you develop. So I would really ratchet down on that, number one. And then, depending on what your interests are or whatever, I would really start building, a website that is very niche specific. I would scrap, if you want to get into finance and you're doing, I don't know, distressed debt or something, I would really double down on that before you start going into other areas. So I think it's really a combination of two things, but I think at the end of the day, you have to realize that you are there and your goal should be to build your brand every day, via on person and online, whatever it is. You want to get your name and your face out there. And at the end of the day, if you're doing it more than the other people, your chances of success are increased.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I think it reinforces the point we kind of touched on earlier, but it's like in all this conversation about AI and future marketing, your bit of advice to the younger you is just go out there and network and shake hands and do the thing that you did in the beginning. And we used to be forced to do it because that was the only way to do business. But I think the point is that a lot of us get distracted doing all the other things, and maybe it's fear or distraction but I think a lot of this tech makes it feel like you're doing something, even if you're not really doing anything. And so we feel like we're putting a lot of time and energy into our business, but we're not doing the things that we could do that will move it the furthest, the fastest. And I think it's just what you said, which is getting out there and networking and shaking hands and meeting people. And I think that's, still kind of the hack, despite AI and everything else coming down. I think that's still where to begin, and you can certainly optimize and add and augment the things that you do in person, but I definitely agree with you that that's where you begin.
Yeah. So get out there and get off the couch, I guess.
Well, it's almost that time, Jonathan. You want to tell people how they can reach out to you, get in touch if they have any questions, want to learn more about your business?
Yeah. I mean, if you have any questions about this, you're looking for a personal injury attorney, you can go to rosenfeldinjurylaw.com. I'm on every social platform as well under Jonathan Rosenfeld, but I only work on a contingency fee basis, so I'm not like a lawyer who's charging you by the hour. So if you have any questions about anything, give me a ring and check it out, and we'll see if we can help you. But thank you for the opportunity to talk with you guys. It was fun. I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for making the time for us. I mean, we're taping this December 29th, right between Christmas and New Year's, so I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And, and I think it'll give people a nice little place to hit the ground running for 2026. I think we talked about a lot of good stuff. So thanks for doing that. Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.